Hi, Stephanie and Marnie. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for
Thank you for
having
having
us.
us.
We're very
Absolutely.
excited.
I'm so excited to talk about this topic. But before we get started, can you two just give us a little bit of background about yourselves, who you are, and how you kind of started working together?
Sure. I'm Marnie, and I am an integrative health practitioner and certified health coach and yoga teacher. And I have my own coaching practice called Zen Full Life Coaching. And Stephanie and I met, she'll tell you about herself, but we met in a women's mastermind group. It's been a number of years, maybe like 5 years ago now. And we just were both working out of the same women's co-working space called Modern Well. And we decided that we would team up and do some workshops together, some like sugar workshops and group health coaching workshops. And then after doing that for a while, that went really well. We decided that we would start a podcast together. So we started the Art of Living Well podcast about 3 years ago. It's almost been 3 years. And so we're continually dropping episodes weekly. And we also are running quarterly liver detoxes together. So group programs and some other, programs, a Thrive program. And we also run a health transformation audit together. So we're doing a bunch of things together, and then we both have our own separate businesses as well.
Great. And we're so excited to talk about sugar because it's such an important topic for everyone. I think we're overloaded by sugar. But let's just start, can you give us, that's your expertise. Can you give us a little bit of background about what is sugar? How does it affect the body? We all know basically what sugar is. We have bags of sugar, we have sugar in our food, but kind of really dial into what it is and how it's really affecting our body.
Yeah, well, I would say I'm a former sugar addict. I think Marnie would probably say the same. A lot of people are. And sugars are carbohydrates, right? And kind of their simplest forms. And they affect our body differently based on the type of sugar that we're consuming. And, all carbohydrates are, end up as sugar or glucose in our body, except from fiber, which kind of helps push out the waste, right? So a lot of this has to do, when we talk about sugar, it's what type of sugar are we talking about? Are we talking about naturally occurring sugars that are in fruits and vegetables? Or are we talking about refined sugars? So that's the candy and the sweets and the things that we know of to be sugar. But a lot of it has to do with what type of sugar we consume and how it's processed in our body. And, let's face it, we don't need sugar. We don't need refined sugar to live, because refined sugar, it's deficient of vitamins and minerals. So when we eat sugar in fruit and vegetables, that's very different on our body than the sugar that we eat from candy and sweets. And quite honestly, there's a lot of hidden sugars out there, because sugar is now in, sauces and marinades and dressings and beverages, as we know.
And we actually have, just to interrupt you for a second, this handout that's not showing up right now, but we have a handout with 61 names for sugar. And a lot of the names on here are things that muscovado and dextrose and barley malt and beet sugar and castor sugar and date sugar and dehydrated cane juice. There's so many, just goes on. And you're like, whoa, I didn't know that was all sugar.
I agree. It gets confusing because you're looking, and then sometimes you can think oh, cane juice, well, that's not sugar, or cane sugar. And it's almost like in organic products where you feel oh, okay, that's better, but it's still sugar.
Still sugar. That's just all marketing and labeling, just to say something's non-GMO, organic, or gluten-free. If it's high in sugar or even really high in carbohydrates and processed food, that just ends up as sugar. It spikes your blood sugar level. And we can talk a little bit about that more later. But, at least when you're eating fruit and vegetables, you have fiber, right? And your body needs fiber, and it also slows down that blood sugar spike. So very different to talk about added sugar versus naturally occurring sugars.
And Stephanie, I think you brought up a really good point when you said, we don't, just because it says organic or non-GMO, that doesn't mean that it's not filled with these sugars. So it's super important to read labels and know, what is the added sugars that you're getting in the product? Because I do think a lot of people think, oh, well, it's, these fruit snacks are organic, so they're actually good for my child. And that's not exactly the case.
Yeah, this is like a little side note, but it was so interesting because my 17-year-old son, he lives with me, he hears all this, and you don't know if it's, really actually sinking in, but there was a condiment we had and it was organic. It was something that was supposed to, and he was sitting there with the label in front of him. It was something, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something you would never suspect. Like you're not thinking when you're using that. And he's like, look, Mom, the top ingredient of this it was like cane sugar or something. It was something like you're saying where it was not labeled as sugar, but it was right there. And he picked up on it. I was like, whoa, when you have the 17-year-old boy picking up on the fact that this product that you think you're just getting like an organic, and I mean, I bought it. I didn't admittedly look at that label because I was just probably in a hurry, but where the sugar was the number one ingredient. And so it's really hidden so many places.
It is. And there's more and more research that keeps coming out on the impact, the health ramifications of too much sugar, and the metabolic disease, and obviously diabetes, and, obesity, and just even like mental health. Right. So it's real, and we can talk about sugar addiction too, because that's part of this.
Yeah,
let's jump into a little bit about sugar addiction.
I mean, sugar addiction is very real. And I don't think people realize how extreme it actually is. Like, they've done studies in the past saying that sugar is more addictive than cocaine, which is kind of scary, right? And, we crave sugar because of the dopamine in our brain, which is a chemical messenger that delivers a signal to and from the brain and helps us, control these feelings of reward and pleasure. And the more we give ourselves sugar, the more our brain thinks we want more of that. And so it craves more. And it turns into kind of this vicious cycle where the more you eat, the more you crave, the more you eat, the more you crave. And it's like, if you just picture, that hamster wheel, it's really hard to get off of it.
Yeah, and there's, to Marnie's point, there's been studies where, one, if you look at like a brain scan, like dopamine, someone on cocaine versus someone on sugar, they're the same. So it's that same pleasure, right? And there've also been studies with previously cocaine addicted rats who prefer sugar, like when offered sugar or cocaine, they're picking sugar. So there is a reason why you have the sugar craving, and it's real, and it's not your fault, because 80% of the products in a grocery store contain added sugar. And, these manufacturers are creating these products in a lab to get you to crave more and go through the withdrawal, just like you do with drugs, and then, go back to the store and buy more. And that's just a vicious cycle. It's a roller coaster up and down.
Yeah, and it's really scary. I was just going to say, when you think about it, that these companies are designing their products in mind so that you will be addicted to them and you will buy more of them.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too, when she was saying that, because it was like, their goal is to make money. So they actually do. I think we lose that sight that really all of these companies' goals are to make money. And so they want you to be addicted. They want you to want to go back to more, because then you'll buy more. And I even know, I don't know about you ladies, but whenever I watch my sugars, but when I do eat something, like let's say it's a birthday party or a holiday, and I'm just like, okay, it's like, you can't stop eating. Just one more bite. You know what? I'm just going to eat one more bite. And I'm like, I know that it's spiking my blood sugar. I know what it's doing, but it's hard to stop once you start.
Yeah. I mean, I have the same problem. It's like, I mentioned earlier that we lead these quarterly liver detoxes, and they always seem to come at the right time, because that's like a really good reset for me to back off of sugar. And we're both teaching this. We're both coaching people continually about, how to have a healthy relationship with sugar. Yet as a coach myself, I still can get into that spiral, like you said, over a holiday or a birthday or whatever. And then I'm like, oh, well, I'll just keep eating it and I'll just keep eating it. And I even know what I'm doing. And it's like, it's that, that brain of ours that just is telling us to keep eating it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I have the same issues.
So what are some tips that you guys teach people in your workshops and in different things to like really start to curb your sugar cravings? As we're talking about, once you're in it, it's hard. People just have trouble. I know I say like, try not to keep it in your house, but we all live with a whole house full of people, and maybe you have some things for your kids or you have things. And I know people have trouble grabbing those things and staying away from them. So do you have any tips you could share on like how you recommend curbing some of these cravings?
Yeah. And I think one of the things, even before kind of getting into some of the tactical tips, is really like understanding how cravings work. Because I have clients all the time, like I have a sugar craving, I have an intense sugar craving, like on a daily basis. And I think that's the time to, if you are in that position, and a lot of people are, to assess like, what's my body trying to tell me? So our bodies communicate with us through, that's how they communicate with us, through cravings. As one mechanism. And it's really asking yourself some simple questions. So, what have I had to eat today? Like, am I nutrient deficient? If I had just a very carby, starchy, or sugary breakfast and lunch, there's no wonder, with not a lot of protein and fat, then probably no wonder you're having these sugar cravings, because your blood sugar is spiking and then it's dropping and it's craving more sugar. Am I dehydrated? The average American is chronically dehydrated. So if you're not drinking, say, half your body weight in ounces a day of water or herbal teas, that could be your body's way of, again, just you're dehydrated, but you think you're hungry and craving sugar. Boredom and just kind of habit play into this as well. So before you pick up that cookie, ask yourself, why am I eating this? Like, why am I eating this cookie? Am I hungry? Am I eating it, rushing, standing on the go, like hovering it down? Did I not eat a very well balanced meal for lunch or earlier in the day? Am I stressed? Is there something else I could do to overcome those feelings? And a lot of people, especially women, emotionally eat, myself included. And so it's really just like kind of having a talk with yourself about why you're making those choices is a starting point.
Yeah. And actually, even when you're saying the stress, the increase in cortisol itself can actually also make you more likely to want to crave those sugars and those sweet things. So physiologically, you can be too, even so you're stressed and you're eating emotionally because you're stressed, but then physiologically, it's actually feeding those cravings sometimes.
And I would even take it a step further and say that lack of sleep, a lot of people have trouble sleeping these days. Lack of sleep also, people tend to crave sugar and eat. There are lots of studies out that say that people eat less healthy and they eat more processed foods tied to the amount of sleep they're getting. So sleep is so important also. And I know that's a lot of stuff when you're thinking about stress and sleep and water and being mindful and whatever. But those are all super important things to consider. And we do have some suggestions as well. I know Stephanie mentioned eating a well-balanced diet, but like you can crowd out those sugar cravings by filling your plate with more vegetables. And, even each meal, if you're thoughtful about crowding out the bad stuff and filling yourself with vegetables and fruits and, foods that come from the earth instead of foods that come from a box. Super important. Meg or Dr. Meg, I know you mentioned that it's hard to clean your house out of sugar, but even just doing a mini pantry cleanse, I think is helpful. It depends on the person and how much sugar is in the house, but when it's in the house, it's really hard not to eat it. So I do think it's super helpful to not have it in the house. If you have kids and they need certain sugary snacks, maybe be more thoughtful about what those snacks are, maybe make some small changes. Just think about how you can change the household. You know, maybe if you have a super big box of Hershey bars, maybe you scratch the Hershey bars and you have, you know, one dark chocolate bar where you eat a little square of it because you want a little something sweet and you want to savor it and be mindful about it. And I think to that point, a lot of having a healthy relationship with sugar is not necessarily saying you can't have any sugar ever, but really thinking about, like Stephanie mentioned earlier, thinking about, you know, how you're eating that sugar, why you're eating that sugar. If it's your birthday and you want a piece of cake, have the piece of cake and by all means enjoy yourself. Don't beat yourself up about it. But it's more that daily sugar habit that we're trying to change and trying to help people realize that, you know, mindlessly eating sugar to fill an emotional need or to fill time in your day or whatever it is, maybe isn't the healthiest relationship with sugar, if that makes sense.
No, that's absolutely. And even sometimes setting your kitchen up, like you're saying, put your things in a certain place, I think, in a different, like if you're trying to do this and maybe not everyone around you is compliant, like that's your drawer. You're like, even setting your kitchen up in the right way can be helpful too.
Yeah. And I think to Marnie's point, like the emotional aspect of eating sugar and have a healthy relationship with sugar is, you know, eat sugar when you're like enjoying it as a meal or as a celebration or with people versus like eating it by yourself, you know, eating it alone to fill that emotional void. So save the sugary, you know, desserts or things that you really enjoy and like the taste of for those moments when you're with other people and again, it's like that emotional aspect and the mental aspect of the sugar is what's important to be aware of. And that's just kind of like the first step. Like, why am I making these choices?
Yes. Yeah. And I think another thing that you brought up with regards to like how it's paired, like with fiber, with protein, you know, whether it's glucose, whether it's fructose. I mean, like there's a difference with fructose being, you know, drinking, let's say a drink with high fructose corn syrup being rushed into your blood and your blood sugar is going to spike up because there's nothing else there, than eating an apple that has sugar, but with fiber, with, you know, or if you're putting protein. So balancing that blood sugar in a way is so important. So I think that pairing is key too.
Yeah. And, you know, Marnie and I both have been using a continuous glucose monitor off and on over the last year. And it's been super fascinating. Because yes, obviously when you're doing if you were doing a high, you know, an apple juice or versus an apple, but even everyone's different. So everyone's body reacts differently. Their blood sugar level rises and gets out of range for a longer period of time, but just pairing the food, like you said, with protein, especially. So like making sure you're getting enough protein and fiber, and the order of how you eat your food really can help reduce those blood sugar spikes. And ultimately, we didn't get into this, but that's really the issue from a metabolic health standpoint, is too many of those spikes and being out of kind of a normal range for a long period of time because your body has to produce insulin. And ultimately, when too much of that happens over a period of time, then you can become insulin resistant and, you know, maybe even diabetic. So it's amazing what we've learned about some of these tips that anyone can do. You do not even need a continuous glucose monitor because there's so much science out there that shows what you can do.
Yeah. Could you tell us, because that is something I do have a lot of people that are interested in the continuous glucose monitor. It's something I've wanted to dial in myself. I just haven't had time. Have there been any really like surprising things you've learned about yourself since using it?
I mean, for me, one thing that I love and that I found super interesting is after a meal, if I get up and take a walk, even if it's for like 10 minutes, I try and do longer than 10 minutes, but even if it's 10 minutes, or I bet it would even do this for 5 minutes, although I haven't tested it, my blood sugar just stabilizes so much quicker than if you eat a meal and you just go sit on the couch or you just stay at the table or whatever. So that is something that everybody can do. It's free. It's easy. You know, we have a guest coming on our podcast from Levels. I can't remember when that's dropping, but at some point soon in the near future. And she said that even if you get up after a meal and do like jumping jacks, that even helps. So just some sort of movement after a meal is going to help stabilize your blood sugar. I thought that was super valuable advice.
Yes. And, even the way that what I've noticed too is if I want to eat a piece of bread, if I'm in a good, nice dinner, or I want to eat some potatoes or like a starchier carbohydrate, I will eat those last and they won't spike my blood sugar. So I will, and this is what I heard some people talk about this. And so if I'm at a restaurant, normally my kids assume, well, mom's not going to eat the bread. I don't eat very much gluten. And I'm like, this is really good homemade sourdough bread. I'm going to eat it. So I'll take the piece, put it off to the side, wait until I eat most of my meal and then eat the bread. And my blood sugar is very stable. Or eat the potatoes at the end of the meal. So I've already had like a ton of vegetables and my protein and fat. And then I have a very small spike in my blood sugar level. So just the order in which you eat your meal. The problem is like most restaurants give you the corn chips or the bread first. And then it just gets you on that roller coaster. Your blood sugar spikes and then you keep wanting more. I mean, there's like the strategy behind it. So just being patient. That's why you never go to a restaurant starving, especially one that is going to be like maybe not the healthiest. And for me, noticed that beans and lentils really spike my blood sugar. So when I was trying to use beans and lentils as a form of a plant-based protein, my body does not like it. I mean, I might as well be eating chocolate cake, and even if I put like a half a cup of blueberries in my smoothie, it's fine. It's not the worst, but I'm much better if I were to eat like eggs with vegetables for breakfast. So it's just very interesting. Everyone's body is so different. So I definitely have been making some small tweaks.
And to her point, like I can have the smoothie with the blueberries and it does not spike my blood sugar. So really everybody's body is different. And you have to figure out what works for you. And that's why these devices, which I think we're going to see more and more of in the next few years, are really fascinating for that personalized medicine that everyone's talking about. But one more thing I want to mention quickly, because we've gone not off topic because this is very much related, but I think it's super important that people read labels in stores. And we touched upon that earlier just for a minute, but the labels have been changed now and they show you that added sugar number. And that number is just so important because that's telling you like, in whatever product you're buying, the amount of, they're just like adding sugar to it. And ideally, you don't want any added sugar in your products. But I think people need to be aware of that and realize how much sugar is actually added to the products.
And
so I just wanted.
Yeah, and to that point, Marnie, the whole like honey and maple syrup, is that natural sugar? Is that added sugar? I mean, at the end of the day, that's still added sugar. It's coming from a natural source. So it's better if you're doing, especially like local honey or an organic dark maple syrup, and baking with those ingredients is better than using refined sugar, but it still is added sugar. You got to be careful even looking at, I did this with my kids recently because they like adding maple syrup to oatmeal, and oatmeal's already like, not that it's bad for you, but it's a carbohydrate, right? And like, let's just pour out and see what a serving of maple syrup is. Cause it's, 25 grams of sugar. And just so they are aware of, and again, it's not to create like restrictions around food, but it's just an awareness because as a society, we're not doing that. That doesn't naturally happen outside of our homes because we're bombarded, especially with kids and teens and the sports drinks and all the things, the candy
We're
and
set
everything.
up for sugar. So, we are. Yes.
We are. I mean,
we're set up to.
Hopefully in 5 years, we won't be having this conversation, but I don't know, and actually, and Marnie talked about labels. I think it's important for people to understand what is the recommended daily allowance for sugar, because up until recently, it wasn't on a label. And sugar was, and that was very strategic, right? But the American Heart Association and the World Health Organization, have limits, and it's like 24 grams for women, which is 4 teaspoons. So six teaspoons, 6 teaspoons, 24 grams. And it's slightly more for men, it's like 8, maybe 9 teaspoons, but that's not a lot. I mean, one sugary drink or one, sugary yogurt in the morning with some granola on top, you're kind of done for the day as far as your added sugar allowance.
Yeah. And when you see those pictures, sometimes, you'll see the pictures online of like how much, like you're going to say, like your glass of orange juice, and then a thing of like how many sugar cubes are actually in that, or like, it's really so amazing. I think there's no concept of where we're getting everything and how much is really there. It's hard to tell because like we're saying, the way it's packaged, the way it's labeled, the way you're advertised to makes you think like, oh, okay, this is good for me. But really, where are how much are you dialing into? And how your unique body is processing all of this glucose too.
But I would say, since we know, the 20, if you're a woman and you are, the 24 grams is like the maximum, the maximum you would get in the course of a day, according to, what's recommended. Now, this is the maximum. So this isn't what you're striving for. And then you look at the labels of the food that you eat on a daily basis and you add up the amount of grams of sugar that you're eating. I think it would be eye-opening to a lot of people.
Yeah, well, let's chat. If you're listening, I'm challenging you right now to do it for 1 week. It's not like something that you have to do forever. Do it for 3 days. That way you can actually see it. Sometimes you don't want to take the time to like food diary all the time, but I always say to people, like, do it for a few days and just see, like you're saying, see that wake up call. What are you getting? What does your diet look like? And how are you really going? How much are you going over that daily recommendation?
Absolutely. And one startling fact for a lot of people is that the average American is consuming like 152 pounds of sugar a year.
Wow.
That's like 2 to 3 pounds per week. So just like think of that, like your weight in sugar. And when you eat that much sugar, part of the issue is that there's no nutrients in it, like we mentioned, but then you're not eating other more nutrient rich foods. So it's just this like vicious cycle, because then you keep craving more sugar and then you're not eating leafy greens and, other nutrient rich foods.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, ladies. This has been so enlightening. So where can people find you to get more information, to hear about your workshops?
Well, first of all, we have a website, which is theartoflivingwell.us. So everything's on our website. We also have our podcast, which we would encourage you all to listen to, which is the Art of Living Well podcast, where we drop episodes weekly. And we're on Instagram at theartofliving_well. Is that everything?
Yeah, I think so. And then Facebook as well, but those are primary places where we hang out. And we, we'd love to hear from you about your relationship with sugar and maybe where you're, having some challenges. So feel free to reach out to us, email, all the places. And Marnie mentioned earlier, we do run a quarterly 7-day functional medicine liver detox, which we're actually in the middle of right now, or towards the end of right now, for our fall one. And that's a great way to like reset and get off that sugar, roller coaster. So if you're interested, we have those quarterly, and you can get all that information on our website.
And our next one does start January 8th in 2023.
Yes.
Well, that's all wonderful. So we're challenging all of you today to take a look at your sugar and try some of these new, I'm going to cut that. So we're challenging all of you today to take a look at how much sugar you're consuming and really start focusing on dialing it in, because it can make such a huge difference with your health. So thank you for joining me, ladies, and everyone have a great day.